The New Orleans Saints' 3-year contract extension with tight end Juwan Johnson is not an overpay, provided that the team holds up its end of the bargain. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, Tetairoa McMillan impresses at his pro day. Cam Ward would love to be a New Orleans Saint. Isaac Yiadom and Will Clapp praise the Saints' newest schemes and systems. And Juwan Johnson's contract is not an overpay. We got all that and more for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much making us your first listen and for being it every day or here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off of your first purchase. The New Orleans Saints extension of Juwan Johnson, 3 years, just over $30 million in terms of total value, just over $10 million in terms of total annual value, is not an overpay. I made this claim the other day on the show where I said that Juwan Johnson's contract is consistent with the tight end market. And I was reminded by my very good friend Darian Gray, who hosts Locked on HBCU, that I said that in the show. And so I wanted to come back to that point and express why I feel that way and why that is indeed the case. I wanted to make sure I wasn't just making a claim and that I was showing you the research behind the claim. So here's the research that I looked at. For the New Orleans Saints, giving Juwan Johnson a contract that has an average per year value of $10.25 million, it puts Juwan Johnson in a category of tight end that includes guys like Hunter Henry, who get paid $9 million per year, up to guys like Dalton Schultz with the Houston Texans, who gets paid $12 million per year. Now, there's a name that I'm removing from this, and that's Taysom Hill. Because basically Taysom Hill makes $10 million per year and outproduces every tight end not named George Kittle and Travis Kelce and other big name top paid tight ends, because he does so many things that have nothing to do with necessarily the tight end position. He can throw, he can run, he does all these other things. So I'm removing Taysom Hill from this equation because he's just an unfair comparison for any tight end across the league. But if you look at names like Hunter Henry, Dawson Knox, Noah Fant, Evan Ingram, Dalton Schultz, those are all guys that are in kind of the $3 million area of where Juwan Johnson is, down to $9 million, up to $12 million at the top portion of that. If we look at Juwan Johnson's production as a tight end over the course of the past few years and average that out over the course of a 7-game season, so a 7-game per year average, he fits exactly where his contract sits. So in terms of the order of players that end up getting paid the most, you go from Hunter Henry to Dawson Knox to Juwan Johnson. Those are all guys that are right around that $10 million, $9 million per year area. Then you go up to Noah Fant, Evan Ingram, and Dalton Schultz. That's when you get into $10.5, $11.5, $12 million amongst those. That's effectively the same thing that you get in terms of ranking out the amount of production that each of these guys gets. It's effectively the same order. The difference is, and my two major takeaways from this comparison, is that Juwan Johnson, who in a 17-game average over the course of years that he has been a focused tight end, has averaged 48 receptions, 526 yards, and 5 touchdowns. That outperforms Dalton Schultz when you do the exact same math with him, who averages 51 receptions, but for only 523 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. Juwan Johnson technically outranks the highest paid player on this list at $12 million per year on a per 17-game average. So this is why I say that Juwan Johnson is not overpaid. The issue here, or not the issue, but the underlying factor here, though, is that he won't be overpaid if the New Orleans Saints hold up their end of the bargain. If you look back at the past few years, Juwan Johnson and the tight ends have sort of been treated with a in emergency break glass kind of mentality. They have been utilized as, early on in the season, having to help with the pass blocking game and pass protection because of injuries on the offensive line. Then eventually those injuries end up permeating out to the wide receivers. Once the wide receivers are hurt, then all of a sudden in the latter portions of the season, that's where you see Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, and other tight ends end up getting more involved in the game. Again, Taysom Hill is his own creature in this conversation. And so for the Saints and for Kellen Moore, who are not paying Juwan Johnson based on what it is that he has done in the past, but instead are paying Juwan Johnson based on what they feel they'll be able to do with him, and this comes down to Kellen Moore, they will have to make sure that they get the production that matches the value here. This is going to be the kind of end-all be-all of all of this. Comes down to, can the Saints themselves get the production in return in which they have invested? That's going to be the most important position in all of this. Can the whole support the effort, or really can the effort of many end up reconciling the investment in one? So that's what this is all going to come down to. The New Orleans Saints will have to hold up their end of the bargain and not treat the tight end position with that in case of emergency break glass kind of mentality that we've seen with recent offenses. So it's just as much the onus on the Saints to make this contract work in terms of getting the value back as it is on Juwan Johnson, who has shown already that he can have the impact that he believes that he can have. He said the other day, at the end of the day, there's going to be a time where it's all going to click and it's going to get scary. That needs to begin here in 2025. And the Saints hold just as much responsibility in making that happen as Juwan Johnson himself does. I want to talk about another contract here as well, but I wanted to give you that. That's why I say that this is actually consistent with the market and not an overpay. But here's another contract thing that the Saints did over the course of the past few days. They actually did it back, my understanding is like March 10th, 11th, sometime around there. But they dropped the base salary and addressed the contract of Cedrick Wilson Jr. He was a player that we saw as a potential cut that would have saved around $2.5 million, $2.4 million. Saints continue to stockpile money with a move, keeping him around, but still saving some money. So what they did was that they took his base salary of $2.7 million and they dropped it all the way down to vet minimum, 1.17. Not a restructure. They didn't convert the gap in that to a signing bonus to spread out over multiple years, anything like that. And they actually removed from the looks of it his $200,000 roster bonus. So all told, the Saints are saving around $1.73 million to keep Cedrick Wilson in the building. Now, will Cedrick Wilson actually make the roster? We'll see. There's no money, new money guaranteed to him or anything like that in terms of this deal for 2025. So if the Saints move on from him, they move on from him, and they might actually end up still saving some money if they do so. But here's the thing. Cedrick Wilson Jr.'s best career season came under Kellen Moore. Now, I'm not saying that Cedrick Wilson Jr. is about to have his best career season again, but back in 2021 is the reason why we were excited when Cedrick Moore first got signed for 45 receptions, 602 receiving yards, and then 6 touchdowns because he was utilized heavily as a slot receiver. Well, in typical Dennis Allen fashion, he gets signed to New Orleans, and in 2022, instead of him taking more snaps in the slot, he took more snaps on the outside. And you might say, well, Ross, that only happened because of the fact that Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed were dealing with injuries. So of course he played on the outside, but that's not entirely true. Through the first 7 games of the season, before those injuries ended up setting in to a massive extent, he actually took more snaps on the outside than on the inside in every game but 2. And in those 2 games, week 6 and 7, he took 2 more slot snaps than out wide snaps in both of those occasions. So if Kellen Moore is seeing that he can still do something with Cedrick Wilson like he did when Cedrick Wilson took 500 slot snaps to 85 out wide snaps back in 2021, then it makes sense that Kellen Moore would try to keep him around, especially if you can also save money in the meanwhile, which is the approach that the Saints took. I wouldn't have high expectations for what 2025 is going to be for Cedrick Wilson Jr., but it does get a little bit interesting with Kellen Moore in the building. Coming up next, 2 returning New Orleans Saints have high praise for the Saints' newest offseason investments on the offensive and defensive sides of their scheme. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Upwork. Scaling your business requires expertise and finding it at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in a ton of different departments: marketing, development, design, and much more. IT, AI, experts ready to to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives your business the flexibility that you need by connecting with top freelancers across several different industries, whether you need extra hands-on for a specific project, or maybe you're looking for a long-term partner. Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. What I love about Upwork is that if you're hiring, but you're not necessarily able to hire for a full-time role, you're just looking for people to help you out for projects and things like that, cost-effective growth, as well as fast and easy hiring is what you're going to find over at Upwork. So visit Upwork.com right now to post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time, the best place to go to get affordable tickets for your favorite events, whether you're into sports, theater, comedy, concerts, and much more. You're going to be able to find it all over at Game Time, help you get to some of those unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person, and Game Time will help you get there, because getting tickets on Game Time is easy, especially with Game Time Picks, which curates your list for you to make it easier to find better value for the tickets that you're looking for the big events that you want to be a part of. And with all of their peace of mind processes, I absolutely love it, right? You can see the view from your seats before you buy the tickets. No surprise fees, just toggle on all-in pricing and lowest price guarantees. You're going to be able to find it all and take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family, a couple of returning New Orleans Saints praising the team's moves on offense and defense when it comes to the new systems that are in place. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us. Will Clapp making his way back to the New Orleans Saints offense and has played in Kellen Moore's offense before, and he was particularly complimentary of it, whether it was during his time meeting with us, New Orleans media, via Zoom, or during his conversation with Matt Moscona over at After Further Review on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. There were a lot of opportunities there for Will Clapp to praise what he experienced in Kellen Moore's offense, and he took every opportunity that he got, which I do think says something. I think a lot of people believe that some of that is lip service and everything, like, oh, well, of course, what is he going to say? Like, is he going to say something negative? He doesn't have to say anything at all if he doesn't want to. And so saying something positive still means something in today's world, just in general. And so when I look at where Will Clapp is in terms of praising, where things were with Kellen Moore, one of the things that he said was that it was his favorite offense that he's ever been a part of, so that he has so much fun in that offense. And a big reason why was because of Kellen Moore's ability to make things concise, easy, and intentional for the offense. Not a lot of big flowery language in terms of play calls and things like that. Just kind of keeping everything simple, keeping everything manageable, and making everything intentional and effective. There was no indirect sort of, criticism of players. It sounded like he was very much about like, hey, if this didn't work, I'm going to be very clear about why it didn't work, what we're going to do about it, and how we're going to make it better moving forward. But also didn't do a lot of things in terms of asking players to do things that they weren't strong at doing. This is something that I followed up with Will Clapp about, because I do think that there's like a level of the idea of, oh, I want to know what everybody's superpowers are, and I want to lean into that we can see pretty easily on our own as outside viewers of the game, people that aren't in the huddle, that aren't on the sideline, that aren't on the field, right? It's easy for us to kind of see that from a pass catcher perspective, right? Oh, this player's really good in contested catch situations, so don't be afraid to put the ball up for him at 50-50 ball opportunities. Great. This player is a really good speed threat. Maybe get them working horizontally, get the ball in their hands in space, and then let them be able to utilize that, or utilize their speed downfield before the catch. Easy to see. This running back, really good out in space, evading and being elusive. So get them out in space with the outside zone run, get them involved in the passing game out in the flats, things like that, and let them be able to play to the best of their abilities. Great, right? Easy to see those things. Quarterbacks, all that. Where it's not as easy to see is on the offensive line. How do you play to an offensive line strengths? How do you play to an offensive lineman's individual strength? So I asked Will Clapp about that. And one of the things that he mentioned, while also praising Brendan Nugent, who has now returned to New Orleans Saints as the offensive line coach, was the offensive line coach with Will Clapp over in Los Angeles as well, both years that Will Clapp was there. Will Clapp and Kellen Moore, of course, only overlapping for the 2023 season out in Los Angeles. But one of the things that he mentioned when it came to Brendan Nugent and when it came to Kellen Moore was this idea that, like, hey, the thing that Will Clapp does really well is that he plays to who he is. He's aware of the things that he does well. He's aware of the things that he doesn't do well. And so put him in position to do the things that allow him to play within his strengths. And so some of the things that he mentioned with that is that, like, maybe you have a guard that's really good at pulling and blocking on the run. Maybe you have a right side of your offensive line that's really good at, getting downhill and kind of winning in the gap scheme area. Maybe you have a left side of the line that's really good at, getting out in front and being able to open things up in the zone run area. And so how do you end up kind of building your game plan to accentuate and amplify what it is that those sides of the line or those individual offensive linemen do very well? And so I think that that's a really, really good piece of insight. And it's like, yeah, okay, cool. So that's one of the reasons why you probably do want a balanced approach in terms of your offense. Not all zone run, not all outside run, not all inside, not all gap scheme, but instead mixing it all around. A little bit outside, a little bit inside, a little bit of zone, a little bit of man, and being able to play to all the different things that the different players in different areas of your offensive line are best at executing. And so I thought that was a really good conversation. But I think that one of the things that Will Clapp kind of really highlighted was just how much this offensive scheme of Kellen Moore's works for the player and sounds player friendly, right? The ability to be able to translate the language of the system, the system's emphasis on what it is that you do well as an individual player and what the team does well as a unit, and also specific areas of the field where things go well, like maybe these two wide receivers run this route combination particularly well, so let's lean on that in situations where, you need a quick 5 yards, or this tight end's really good at setting up this block on the run and a screen pass. So let's run the screen pass to that side, whatever it might be. Like, it's not just, hey, what does Fosamaro do well? What does Juwan Johnson do well? But what can you do well when both those guys are on the field? What can you do well when both those guys are on the field and on the same side of the field versus when they're on opposite sides of the field? What can you do if you have Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed on the same side of the field versus when they're on the opposite sides of the field? So it's not just about building to the individual player's strength, which is still a part of it, don't get me wrong. But in relation to other players, how do you end up building an entire game plan off of that? Well, you're looking at what you can do in terms of how players can complement one another or partner with one another in certain schemes and systems as well, games that you're trying to run on the offense. So really good insight there from Will Clapp. I really enjoyed that. We heard similar praise, though, from Isaac Yiadom, who's also making his return, and now will be with Brandon Staley for the third time in his career. They overlapped in Denver. They overlapped last year when Brandon Staley was the assistant head coach for the San Francisco 49ers, while Isaac Yiadom was there for that year. And a big part of what Brandon Staley did as the assistant head coach is that he worked with the corners and the nickels. So Isaac Yiadom, again, getting to work with him here for a third time in New Orleans. And I asked Isaac a question about something that Brandon Staley has said before, which is that he's willing to change the game plan each week based upon what it is that an opposing offense does well. So you're wanting to play the matchup game and all those other things. I don't think you're changing the core of who you are in terms of DNA or anything like that. But I do think that there was an indication that, hey, if a team does this really well, I want to try to take that away, not just play to my strengths, right? And so I asked Isaac, is that something that you like as a defensive player, the opportunity sometimes to be able to do something a little different week to week? And he said, yeah, that is a big part of what he likes about Brandon Staley's scheme, because you're not going to be giving up the same things over and over again. I don't want to be doing the same thing every week, because then the offenses are going to come in doing the things that take advantage of that. So again, a little bit of an adjustment game plan, matchup game plan, like we see Kellen Moore do on the offensive side, is what we should expect to see from Brandon Staley on the defensive side. So I like both of those guys coming back to new systems than where they were before here in New Orleans, and finding ways to both bring familiarity, understanding, and be able to speak highly of what those systems and schemes are. Coming up next, a couple of draft prospects making some waves. Tetairoa McMillan causing some conversation with his pro day, and Cam Ward wants to be a New Orleans Saint. We got all that and much more coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are picking at number 9 overall in the NFL draft, but that doesn't stop some draft prospects that are expected to go much higher from still dreaming about the idea that they could be a New Orleans Saint. That was the case with Miami quarterback Cam Ward. Sharif Ishak from over at WDSU putting out the video of Cam Ward, who was receiving the Manning Award, which is the award that's given out by the Sugar Bowl committee for the nation's best quarterback. Cam Ward of Miami winning that award, was here in New Orleans receiving it at the Sugar Bowl headquarters or whatever, and was asked a little bit about his meeting with the Saints at the NFL Combine. And one of the things that he said was that playing as a New Orleans Saint would be a dream. He said that the Saints were one of his favorite teams growing up, grew up and loved watching Drew Brees and Marcus Colston and things like that. And so now that has created this big kind of narrative around the idea that the Saints could potentially look to trade up for Cam Ward. So I wanted to discuss this possibility, and I want to look both sides of it. I'll start with the side that's most realistic, which is that Cam Ward will not be a New Orleans Saint. That is the more realistic situation out of the two. Is it a surefire thing? No. Am I pretty sure about it? Yes. I think several years we just see this over and over again. Oh, the Saints really like Mac Jones. Oh, the Saints really love Kenny Pickett. Oh, the Saints need to draft Malik Willis. Oh, they love this quarterback, that quarterback, this quarterback, that quarterback. And then inevitably in the first round, they do what they have done since Archie Manning, which is not draft a quarterback. And I don't think that's going to change this year, barring something completely unforeseen. Now, we discussed in yesterday's episode that the Saints are stockpiling money, and maybe there's a reason for that. It doesn't have to do with an addition, but instead has to do with a subtraction, which could be moving on from Derek Carr. Now, just to make sure that I'm very clear about that, saving up money here in 2025 in order to be able to absorb dead money in 2026 by rolling some of that money over into 2026 could mean a split from Derek Carr post June 1 this year, but more likely is in reference to or is preparing yourself to absorb a dead money hit with a split coming next year, because you'll have to carry a larger amount of money and cap hit from him from March in the new league year up until June 2nd, at which time the numbers change and things like that. So you got to be ready to absorb some of that. So carrying over and rolling over some of the 2025 money that you've opened up into 2026 helps you do that. Now, it's not to say that the Saints won't also be adding players and things like that. Certainly they have a draft class that they got to fit in. There's still an open left guard spot that you're looking to fulfill. You've still got veteran wide receivers you can lean in on, veteran linebackers you can bring in, all those other pieces. And I also think there's a reality too where the Saints are trying to say, you know what, we want to be ready to spend for post-draft when more veterans will look to sign, because they want to make sure they're signing at a place where they're not going to be immediately replaced by a draft pick. And so we see the veteran market move now, not just that first week of free agency, but comes alive again after the draft, and then comes alive again right before training camp, because some veterans don't want to participate in OTAs and mini camps and stuff like that. And I don't blame them. So they sign right before training camp. So there's a lot of reasons why you're stockpiling money and saving money and you're ready to spend at any point. But obviously the quarterback conversation is a big part of that. And if the Saints were to move up to go and draft Cam Ward, then certainly it opens up the opportunity to potentially trade Derek Carr post June 1, even though it would be a wild move. We've seen teams be willing to take on $80 million of dead cap in total for quarterbacks already in the NFL. So could the Saints become next on that list? We'll find out. But I don't know that the Saints are necessarily going to be looking to do this because this is a team that, even though they're not going to say it out loud, like they are still a team that is rebuilding. They are still a team that is retooling, adding talent, whatever it is that you want to look at it. And so leveraging your future draft capital to move up for this quarterback that wants to be a part of your team, but maybe isn't necessarily the Saints' biggest target. Just because Cam Ward says, I would love to be a Saint, doesn't all of a sudden make the Saints go, you know what? We'd love for you to be a Saint. Like they'd have to like him beyond that in terms of what he can do as a player. Now, the other side of it is, maybe they do want to leverage that draft capital. Maybe they do like Cam Ward a lot. Maybe he is the one quarterback in this class they'd be willing to draft, and therefore they feel the need to go and get him. Then all of a sudden you have all these other mechanisms that are already set up. So I said I wanted to look at both sides, but both sides really come down to the same thing. Do the Saints like him as much as he likes them? And do the Saints have the situation available to them and the capital available to them to make that trade, move up, and potentially look to grab that quarterback? And are they okay splitting with Derek Carr? Because I doubt that you're going to trade all the way up for a Cam Ward and then turn and look at Derek Carr and say, hey, yeah, you're our guy. You know what I mean? That's going to be a little bit tough to swing. So we'll see, but it's very interesting nonetheless. Certainly an intriguing conversation. The other draft prospect that is more realistic for the New Orleans Saints making some waves right now is Tetairoa McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona. Lots of folks talking about how there's a lot of discrepancy, right, in terms of his 40-yard dash. Some say that he ran a reported 4.48. Everything that I've heard from people over in Arizona is that it's like a mid 4.5, which is about where you expected him to be. And this is just the issue with pro days, right? This is why you should run at the combine. If you want to run at the combine. That way there's no discrepancy, there's no confusion, there's no any of this other stuff. But let me be clear. If Tetairoa McMillan runs a 4.48, or if Tetairoa McMillan runs a 4.45 runs a 4.48, or he runs a 4.55 or a 4.58, he's still a top 10 pick. It doesn't matter. It's not a situation where all of a sudden you go, oh man, 4.5 at 6'4", 219 pounds. I don't know if I can draft that. Get out of my face. Of course you can. Of course you can. Like, stop lying to my face if you're telling me that you're feeling that way. And no one's ever said that to me or anything like that. I'm not actually talking about somebody that said that. But just like if I'm playing the villain, if I'm creating the straw man for the villain here, I'm telling the straw man to get out of my face. Like, I don't want anything to do with that. Like, Tetairoa McMillan's not the guy that you draft because he runs 4.3 or he runs 4.4. He's the guy that you draft because he's better than the cornerbacks that he's going to line up against. He's the guy that you draft because he's a dominant, physical wide receiver that can make your team better. You're not trying to draft Tetairoa McMillan based on his speed. You're drafting him based on literally everything else. And then if he happens to run a 4.48, then fantastic. You love that. If he happens to run a 4.55, that's fantastic. You love that too. Let me remind you, Michael Thomas ran a 4.57. So if he runs anything around a 4.57, you know the value and impact that a player of his caliber, his size, his physicality, his attitude, his mentality can have, even at that speed. So I'm not too worried about what Tetairoa McMillan's official 40-yard dash number is. If it lands somewhere in the 4.5 range, he's a top 10 selection. Very simple, very easy, case closed. But I love the discourse and I love the conversation because Tetairoa McMillan, I think, should be the Saints draft selection at pick 9. If he's on the board, we'll see which way they end up going. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, the New Orleans Saints are set for a top 30 visit with East Carolina cornerback Siobhan Revel. Let's break down what it is that he could potentially bring and why the medical check is the biggest point of his visit. We got that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much making us your first listen. Go and check out Locked On NFL Draft, and we appreciate you very much making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, them, how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.